Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again. Today I'm going to be looking at Allied General, the 1995 classic by SSI. The reason I'm looking at this game is Slytherin Software has recently announced they will be publishing the Lord's Games Studios sequel to Panzer Corps called Allied Corps. The game will focus on the Western Front allies during World War II, and it's a remake of this game, Allied General. So I'm going to talk a little bit in this video about Allied General, the history of the General series by SSI, and then what information we have about Allied Corps, as well as getting a little bit into the actual kind of history surrounding the wargaming industry, if you will. I've been seeing a lot of people posting doom and gloom stories about how war games are all but finished, and the future is bleak, and I wanted to just kind of lend my perspective to that as well. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at a few things here on Allied General. This is the menu screen where you select the campaign. In this game, there are 3 campaigns. One where you start in North Africa as the British, one where you start in the Western African desert as the Americans, and one where you start as the Russians in the Eastern Front. Every scenario opens with a little video, just like what we're about to see here. It kind of gives not every scenario, every campaign. It gives a little overview of what's going on, a little bit of history of the geopolitical situation. That was new for Allied General. Panzer General was based off the same game, but it didn't have this, these little video clips, these little promotional clips, and I thought that was really interesting, and something I really enjoyed about the Allied General series is that they had these little intros, and I would really love it if the Allied General or Allied Corps series by Slytherin implements this. I doubt it'll happen, but it's one of those nice little things that I think adds a lot of gravitas, adds a lot of kind of a feel for the mood, if you will. And I mean, it's something I liked from the old game, so it'd be nice to see it, but like I said, I don't think we will. Alright, now getting into the scenarios a bit here. Every scenario also has a little bit of an intro to where you're going, what you're doing, and where the battle's starting place. This is something that the Panzer Corps series has, and something that the Panzer General and Allied General series also had. They also have a voice actor from whatever country you are, to add a little bit of atmosphere. So, if you're the British, you hear a British accent. In the Panzer Corps and Panzer General series, you'd hear a German accent. Another one of those little things that's not really a big deal. It's cheap to add, but I really enjoy it a lot. I think it kind of sets the mood for these types of maybe more light historical games, and I definitely hope it's something that they include in Allied Corps. I'm sure they will. They included it in Panzer Corps, so I don't see why they wouldn't include it in Allied Corps. Here in Allied General, you see it then gives you a little map and a little artwork to show you the scenario you're fighting. In this one, we're fighting the Battle of Sid Barani, which was the first British offensive against the Italians from Egypt into Libya. The Italians were more or less routed in this battle. I could be wrong here. I didn't look up the actual engagement, so I probably should have, but I know at one point the Italians lost over almost 200,000 soldiers as either killed, prisoners, or deserters in the North African campaign. The British counterattack was so devastating that the Germans ended up intervening in sending several divisions to the south. There you see the strategic map, which is similar to the Panzer Corps series. If you've seen any of my videos on there, there's the grand overview map, and then the more close-in hex map that lets you kind of plan your strategy a bit better. But as I said, in late 1940, the British launched a devastating counterattack in North Africa that drove the Italians back, prompted the Germans to step in and help the Italians, and resulted in Rommel being sent to North Africa with a couple of divisions to assist the Italians, and the rest was history. The North African campaigns with the Desert Fox began, and as I said, the rest was history. This was not the first time the Italians needed the Germans to bail them out, so it was definitely something that I'm not a scholar on World War II, but the Italians, especially early in the war, were certainly a drag on the Germans and caused some of their plans to be thwarted and led to a bit of diversion. This happened also before the invasion of Russia. The Italians invaded Yugoslavia and Greece, met with some initial success, and then were thrown back. The Germans had to come in and bail them out. according to several things I've looked into, that delayed the German assaults on Russia. Some people like to claim that as, helping to lead to the eventual failure of the Barbarossa campaign and the invasion of Russia, because the delays ended up delaying the invasion of Russia enough so that by the time the Germans were within sight of Moscow, the season was changing to winter, and with the seasonal change, it basically saved the Russian army. I'm not so sure on that, if only because when the Germans did end up taking Yugoslavia and Greece, they also cemented their relationships with Romania and Hungary, and were able to gain a much longer foothold against the Russians, so the front they were facing the Russians on was much greater, meaning that the density of soldiers was much less, so they had an easier time penetrating Russian lines, which were stretched long and thin to try and defend their entire border. Granted, as I said, I'm not a scholar of World War II in that sense, so these are just my impressions and, based off of some things that some books and things like that I've read. But anyway, the game is a hex-based game, just like what you're going to be seeing in Allied Corps, just like you saw in Panzer Corps. The game is most likely going to be a reskinned version of Panzer Corps, just as this was a reskinned version of Panzer General. So it's going to look very similar to the Panzer Corps series. So definitely something worth checking out, but graphically it's probably going to be about the same. Obviously there's different terrain in the African desert, different units. The conflict here starts earlier than... well, not really earlier than the previous scenarios, but still, it's a different time period, different area, a lot of different units. The British, for example, would end up having M3, was it M3 Grant tanks? Those weird tanks with a top turret of like a 20mm gun, and then it had a slow, soft 75mm gun in kind of a casemate on the side. American built, sent to the British through Lend-Lease, and it was used during the campaigns in the desert more so than later when the Sherman would end up taking on the brunt of the tank duties. But anyway, so the game you're seeing here is going to be very similar to what you're going to see in Allied Corps. Hex-based combat, abstract units, so no, one unit doesn't necessarily represent a corps, division, brigade, battalion, nothing like that. It's much more modular and flexible. You're going to have to see the Italian side, you're going to see the Germans, you're going to see the British, you're going to see the American. I would imagine you'll also see units from the Free French and maybe Free Polish, because Allied Corps will delve into the Western Front. It's not just the desert like Panzer Corps was. But anyway, getting a little bit more into Allied Corps, it's being produced by the Lord's Game Studios. As I said, it's a sequel to Panzer Corps. It is going to consist of 25 scenarios, so that's quite a few. The original Allied General had 39 scenarios, but it did include 17 scenarios in the East, so it's actually got more scenarios covering the Western Front than the original Allied General here did. I would imagine the first scenario will be similar to this one, a pretty basic one where you're attacking the Italians at Sidbarani in the first major actions in the desert. The game is coming out on June 6th, so it is coming out on the anniversary of D-Day, which is fitting for a Western Front game. Obviously, it's not all focused on D-Day, but obviously it makes sense to kind of line it up with that anniversary there. There will be 50 new units, 50 units that were not included in either Africa Corps or Panzer Corps will be included in this, and there is a beta that you can sign up for on Slytherin.com or SlytherinLimited.com. I will post a link in the description if that's something you're interested in. You can volunteer to participate. They don't automatically select you, and there is a confidentiality agreement, so I'm not yet a part of the beta. I don't know if I will be. I hope I will be, but I also most likely will not be able to make any videos about it, given that there is a confidentiality agreement that you have to agree to when you sign up for the beta. So don't going around telling people all your little ins and outs. I would imagine there's certain things you're not allowed to discuss. But we'll see more about that. Also worth noting is the mega pack of all the grand scenarios for the original Panzer Corps series. So the original Panzer Corps series had a group of scenarios that were released for each year of the war, 39 to 45, that included extra scenarios and kind of a more in-depth hyper campaign on a more micro level. That consisted over 150 add-on scenarios. That's coming out April 23rd, so that'll be out soon. If you didn't get a chance to pick up those expansions, which are pretty cheap, they're only $5, you can pick this up on April 29th on either Slytherin or Matrix's website. I believe you can also buy it directly through the Lords Game Studios. They're the developers of the game. So that's another thing to look forward to. You do need the original Panzer Corps or Africa Corps, I believe, to play that game, or those scenarios. So definitely something worth keeping in mind. If you're going to buy it, you're going to need to make sure you have the original. So Allied Corps, as I said, it's a remake of Allied General. So what does that really mean? What was the General series? Well, Panzer Corps was a remake of Panzer General, which was the first of the General series. They were very successful games. The first came out in 1994, Panzer General. The sequel, Allied General, which is what we're playing here, came out in 1995. It was followed in 1997 by Panzer General II. All told, there were 7 full-length World War II based, and, well, not just World War II, there was also one involving the Chinese. So all told, there were 7 modern day, if you will, or modern day isn't looking at World War II time frame and into the Cold War, I believe, with the People's General. 7 full-size games. They were very successful. Panzer General II sold over 100,000 units. I don't have any figures on any of the other games, but I believe it may have been the most successful. It's certainly the one that I've heard the most about and know the most people who have. Over 100,000 units for that game. There were also 2 sci-fi based games, Star General and Future General, and there was an Xbox Live game which came out in 2009 called Allied Assault, published by Ubisoft, as well as a board game. The game was originally released by SSI, which was very famous for very good strategy games during this time period. This is kind of going to dovetail into what I wanted to talk about for the second half of the video here, which is the state of the PC or wargaming industry as a whole. In May of 1999, the edition of Maximum PC had an article in it titled "Where Have All the War Games Gone?" by Liam McDonald. In the article, he pointed out that in the year 1999, the number of true war games, if you will, that came out was basically, you could count them on one hand. He mentions Operational Art of War 2, the Battleground series had a new release, and there was a new Civil War game by Talonsoft. Those are just 3 that he could think of at the time, and I'm sure there were more, but this is what he's pointing out in the article. He then went on to say that Panzer General III and Steel Panthers were coming out around that time, but they were actually releases in the year 2000. Microsoft at the time had canceled Close Combat and had no plans for any further games. And really that, a lot of the war games kind of were going away. He was pointing out that really the few games that were remaining were games like the Panzer General series, which were more casual and could appeal to a wider audience. And, in the article he surmises that wargaming is dying. That was 13 years ago. And I can kind of see where he's coming from. But it's nothing we haven't heard before. How many times have you read about the death of wargaming, let alone the death of PC gaming? I think a lot of people are worried about new technology, about how the tablet interface is going to impact traditional war games, and how, most of the stuff going on tablets is kind of mindless little 5-minute games, and nothing serious goes on tablets, and that tablets are going to replace the PC, and maybe they will in the long term. I think that's probably a little bit false if we're going to be talking about real elements. I know I'm going to deviate from wargaming here a little bit, but Tomb Raider, which just came out recently, had the best first couple of weeks. It's only been out for about, a month now? But for the first couple of weeks, it had the best sales of any game in Tomb Raider history. This is at a time when people are saying that the next console generation is doomed, that consoles in of themselves are doomed, that PCs are doomed, and it's just one of many games that was breaking records in sales. The new SimCity game, which is much of a debacle as that was, and even though it has nothing to do with wargaming, only out on PC, sold over 2 million units, I believe, already. Just huge demand for these games. I mean, PC wargaming is alive and well. The problem is development costs. A lot of these companies are going out and spending bucket loads of cash on marketing, on high-res graphics, and hiring studios of 100 to 200 people to develop their games. But the problem is not at the lower end or at the the more niche end of the market for gaming right now, for consoles or for PC. The problem is at the high end. The AAA studios haven't yet figured out a way to cope with the increased development costs that graphics are bringing to newer games. And I don't want to delve on that, but I just want to point out that more games now are being sold in many cases than ever before. You see a lot of bad reports, but that's because most of these reports don't include digital sales. And when you talk to the actual development companies and they talk about total sales, sales are very good. It's revenue that's being hurt by increased cost, and sales figures look bad because when retail outfits release retail sales, they're not including digital sales. So of course a lot of that stuff is shifting, digitally, and we see that with Matrix and Slytherin. Most people buy digitally. You might get a hard copy as well, but a lot of people buy digitally as well. So when people talk about gaming dying, I think it's maybe a little bit easy to do. Yeah, I think tablets are easy and short and casual, but that doesn't mean that they're killing PC gaming. It's another element that's rising toward kind of parity. Consoles didn't kill the PC however many generations they were supposed to. And in 1999, wargaming didn't die like it was supposed to. I think we're seeing a shift, and we've already seen a shift toward more niche publishing for war games, but, isn't that kind of what we want? Don't we want more niche studios that, are more interested in tailoring things to the way we want them? There's a lot of great games out that are relatively recent, and we might not see huge releases of brand new games every year, but that doesn't mean that there aren't games out there that aren't continuing. The Scourge of War series is a good example. Scourge of War Gettysburg came out a couple of years ago. That's still around. It's released how many expansions? It had Antietam, Chancellorsville, Pipes Creek. I think that's it. There was the release a couple years back of War in the Pacific Admirals Edition, and I know, what was that, maybe 5 years ago or something like that. But a lot of these games don't need annual releases. Do we really want our wargaming companies to become like EA, where they just release a can of crap every single year and they don't make any real changes? Wouldn't we rather they work on a game for 3 or 4 years and release a good product? And more proof to the sales. I mean, Matrix released in their Slytherin memos, they talked about how Panzer Corps sold over 200,000 units with the Africa Corps or Panzer Corps and then the expansions. And I know it's not a straight comparison because I'm assuming they're including DLC in there, but compare that to Panzer General 2, which back in the mid-90s sold over 100,000 units. Back in the glory days, if you will, of PC gaming, as it seems to be. I mean, if you think about back in the 90s, all those simulations, a lot of those war games we considered classics were out then. And they weren't selling any worse than they are today. I think we're over-sensationalizing things. And I think one thing that we need to keep in mind, and I am kind of rambling at this point, but it is something that kind of does bug me. A lot of people talk about how tablets are all about these short little 5-minute dinky games and that they don't really have any serious games, and tablets are gaining market share and they're going to replace the PC. And I've already said I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I think the two can coexist. Just because PC chip makers might not be happy with their sales and maybe they're declining doesn't mean that the PC is going to vanish. The PC industry has grown every single year until last year. Every single year in its existence, it's been growing. It doesn't need to keep growing every year to maintain a very, very large industry. But my point is this. The vast majority of people who play war games play on the PC. The vast majority of serious war gamers want to play on the PC. There are people out there who play on the iPad, but the majority of people who want to sit down for 5 hours or 4 hours, or an hour a night, and play a War in the Pacific, and play a Scourge of War, want to play on a PC. Slytherin has shown a willingness to go out there and publish games on the iPad, more casual games, but still games that are going out there on the iPad, and they've done relatively well because they're geared toward more of the casual audience. Why would they waste time and effort pushing games that people don't want to play on tablets? I don't think if you released a War in the Pacific on a tablet, the interface, the vast scale that things are, right now it wouldn't work well on a tablet. So why would you release it? You'd continue releasing games on the PC even if people think it's a doomed system, because that's where the customers are. But as time advances and tablets become more powerful and interface is, improved and TV interaction is improved and maybe, it becomes a more enjoyable experience and some of those people move over to those other technologies, war gamers will move there. Just because tablets are dominated by $5 games today doesn't mean they always will. And it's just something that we need to keep in mind. Tablets and things like that are at the very infancy of their development. So let's just stop stressing and let's just enjoy the games that are out there today and stop preaching the doom and gloom that's to come, because we've heard it before. Just enjoy the games that are around now. Keep buying them. Keep supporting them. And there will be people who will develop games that you like and you enjoy for a long time, as long as that market is there. And a lot of people say, well, the same old guys, the same old people are buying these games every year and they're not being replaced. I'm 25. I've been playing war games since I was 13, and I'm sure I am a outlier in the wargaming community. But everybody's tastes change over time. Most 13-year-olds don't have any desire to play a cerebral thinking game when it comes to like a war game. That doesn't mean by the time they're 40 their tastes won't change and they won't get interested in new things. So like I said, we all need to step back. We all need to take a step back from the ledge and just enjoy the games that are out there. Allied Corps comes out on June 6th. Get it. Enjoy it. The Scourge of War series is out there, and it's a great game for anyone interested in the Civil War. Check it out. Pick it up. Paradox has made a lot of interesting strategy games recently that supposedly have done really well. Crusader Kings is definitely kind of in that genre, maybe more casual, but still it's done very well. If it's your cup of tea, pick it up. Support the games that you enjoy, and they'll continue to exist, because you're not the only ones out there. I'm going to jump into sports here for a moment, but Out of the Park Baseball is a series that's been around for about 14 years. It's almost like a text simulation. The best baseball management game I have ever played is out today. The best baseball simulation game I have ever played is out today on PC. You go back 25 years and you were stuck with crap put out by EA, Triple Play Baseball Series, MVP Baseball Series. Nothing like that existed out there. And it exists today. And the company said, in their last year that they had their best sales ever. There are a lot of people out there. You don't have to sell 10 million copies to be a success. And just because people might shift away from PC doesn't mean developers won't follow them to whatever the next product is. I've said it a ton of times already. Let's step back. Let's enjoy what we have. Let's not stress about the future. Keep supporting the developers you like. Keep enjoying the games. Because life is too stressful or too short to stress about things all the time. Sometimes you just need to sit back and you need to enjoy it. And the rest of things will take care of themselves. But anyway, that's enough of me rambling now. As I said, this was a playthrough of Allied General. Allied Corps comes out June 6th. Check it out. The mega pack for the extra campaigns for Panzer Corps comes out April 23rd. If you're interested in Allied Corps or Panzer Corps, check out some of my other videos that I've done. I've got some footage in it, and have a great day.